Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Dance Teacher Pep Talk. I am your host, Amanda, and I am so glad you are here. This is a space for dance teachers and anyone interested in teaching dance who is looking for motivation and fresh ideas. As teachers, we spend our days motivating and giving pep talks to our students, and now this podcast is a pep talk just for you. We hope that it helps to ignite new ideas and even work through some deep dance related thoughts before you head into the studio. Thank you for your support, and now let's get into today's episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Dance Teacher Pep Talk. I am so excited for today's episode. It is such a good one, and I think it's also a very important one. In today's episode, I sit down with one of my lifelong great friends, Kelsey Rigopoulos. And Kelsey is not only the kindest and sweetest soul, but she is also a absolute wealth of knowledge when it comes to everything nutrition and wellness. She received her Bachelor of Science degree in Food and Nutrition from Framingham State University in the Coordinated Program in Dietetics with a minor in psychology. Kelsey has been a registered dietitian since passing the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics CDR registration examination in the summer of 2015. Kelsey is so passionate about providing education around the effects of diet culture in our food and body relationships and support to anyone who needs it. She is an HAES advocate and she strives to help people find both peace and health, whatever that means for them and their body. Now, all of these topics are so important to us as dance teachers. Not only are we teaching a beautiful art form, but it's also a very physical art form. And along with that, we talk in this episode about proper ways to fuel our bodies and how we should and should not look at food, especially with our dancers and ourselves. Kelsey and I talk about how we grew up during a time of very diet culture focused ads and how that may have changed our perspective on diet and this current generation, and also what the new generation faces in social media and food and nutrition and diet talk that happens there. We talk about the importance of positive body image and promoting acceptance to help create the most safe and warm and comforting dance environment that we can. There are just so many incredible moments in today's interview episode, and I hope that you get out of it as much as I did. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to Kelsey. You can hear her love and passion for what she does in everything she says. She says it so beautifully and in such a way that makes me feel motivated to continue to bring this knowledge forward in my own dance classroom and to others as best I can. So let's get into today's episode.
Hi, Kelsey. I am so glad that you are here today with Dance Teacher Pep Talk. And I know that I know you very well, but could you please take a moment to introduce yourself and let the audience know what it is that you do?
Absolutely. Thank you, Amanda, so much. I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm really honored that you would ask me to be a part of this. So I'm Kelsey. I happen to be a registered dietitian. I've been practicing for almost 10 years. And I think something that will probably come up later is that most of the work that I've done from the beginning of my career has been in the field of eating disorder care and treatment, and has kind of meshed into this world of body image and taking care of ourselves, self-care. It's been a while, but it's been a really, really fun, passionate journey.
Oh, I love that. And I'm so glad you're here to talk about this with us because a whole goal of mine is just to create a more mindful path in our approach as dance educators, and especially when it comes to these topics that, you've mentioned. And, in my past experience, and I feel like, you grew up during this time too, it's kind of our generation, but, we grew up in a time that was like, I feel like it honestly was the strongest diet culture ever. It was like, I mean, I don't know if our parents had this growing up, but like we were constantly bombarded by Yoplait commercials with like trying, grab a yogurt when you're hungry, or there was Weight Watchers food in the stores and like slim fast diets and Atkins diets. Honestly, this was everywhere. Like it was so much a part of, our upbringing. And so now I'm doing all this research and looking at all of this stuff with how I speak about things with my dancers, but like in general as a generation, how do you feel that that has played a part into, shaping who we are right now and, what's going on currently with the diet culture world?
Yeah, as you're speaking, before you'd even said it, my mind went straight to Slim Fast commercials, and I was probably very young at the time, but you're so right. I think in our generation, and even I would say even more heavily in this like current growing up generation of kids, it's huge. And I think something that as a dietitian I talk about all the time in my private practice when I'm seeing people one-on-one is understanding how people are consuming this information, because it really is, like you'd mentioned the phrase diet culture, it really is a cultural influence. So it kind of comes at us in so many different ways. I think the things that I notice the most specific to this generation as far as diet culture like infiltrating our lives is social media, like media aids of all kinds, right? I think when we think of Slim Fast commercials, like we're remembering like TV commercials because that was what we grew up with. But now there are so many different forms of media like TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, like you name it. It comes up a lot in my conversations with people of all ages on how they consume this information and are getting information, whether it's true or not, about food, eating, and taking care of ourselves.
Oh my gosh, that does make a lot of sense. I didn't even think of the social media aspect of it. I know that obviously social media plays a huge part in comparison and like a lot of things that we may be doing with ourselves, but I didn't even think about it in the sense of like the information that we're receiving. Like that is really eye-opening to hear that.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I always feel like I tell people quite a bit, like Dr. Google is not our friend. Like you can Google anything and find an answer. And again, like you'll find 10 different answers to the same question sometimes just because some things are true, some things are not true, and some things are half true. But yeah, and Google is just one media, but like we talked about all the different medias out there, there's so much information about food, dieting. What will happen if you do this? What happens if you do it this way? What happens if you take this avenue? What are you looking for? I'll tell you how to get there. You can find anything you're looking for, whether or not it's actually really good for you. It's out there.
Yeah, that's so true. And especially with like our dancers or, kids being younger and younger on social media, like they're getting access to so much more than we ever had access to. Cause like you're so right. Like the commercials that we saw on TV, that was like how we were seeing these ads influencing us. They can go on their phone any time of day and it's a constant search that they could find this information or be influenced in this way by whatever they're seeing.
Yeah, I would say I think the word that comes to mind when I think about diet culture as far as like where we are consuming this and how it's impacting us is intrusive. Especially for like the kiddos. The kids that are of this generation, it feels intrusive because it's everywhere.
Yeah, that is literally the perfect word to describe it. It completely, you're right. It's everywhere. And it just is such a big part of our lives. So because of that, I wanted to be, even more mindful about how we can, speak on these items within our classrooms in the dance world because, you know that I come from the dance world and stuff like that, even though we're friends, like we're having this conversation as friends. But growing up, I mean, I was very lucky to have mentors that were, very kind, loving, and comforting. But I know that that's not always true. I know that, in the dance world, there's a lot of like stereotype and stigma or almost like an expectation that certain things may happen because you're a dancer. And, I'll speak completely honestly, like things that have come up for me in my years as a dancer is like, disordered eating patterns at times and feeling shame around food choices, almost like, when we're told suggested foods, like we should be eating more protein or, I remember growing up, there was a like guest teacher. It was not somebody that I typically had consistently through the years because this would never have like flown at the studio. But I remember that this guest teacher was setting a piece for us and had us try our costumes on. And now these costumes were from the 1920s. It was a piece that was being reset from the 20s. And I put the costume on. It was really small. And she made a comment like, well, the show wasn't for a couple of months. And, at the time I was like 13, sort of like around puberty age. And like, I was already self-conscious of my body. And that like really made me even more self-conscious. And so even though I'm saying I had a very like warm upbringing, there were many instances in my dance life that kind of lended itself to the stereotype or stigma or things that we face. And at the same time, like the true realities for a lot of dancers, because it really is such a body conscious type of sport and art form. And I think that we just, as educators, it's just so important to be, more aware of that, like more aware of how we speak on things, because we do have such an influence for our students. And so, for all of this, how do you suggest we speak about food in our classroom? And like, should we even? Like, is there a proper way to do this? Like, do you feel like it's more recommended to like bring in a registered dietitian or set up some type of a workshop? Like, what is your opinion on all of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting as I'm listening to you and your experience. Obviously, as you are a dancer, first I'll say I was not a dancer. I knew most of my dance through you and your family, and now as I'm older, I do and have worked with dancers, and I would totally agree. I've heard so many like similar stories about whether it be like food comments, body comments. So I think there's two pieces that I'm sure we'll like kind of touch on both. Is like the food piece of things and the body image piece of things. And I think that there are probably like ways that people could talk about each in a, like you said, a kind, comforting, nurturing, welcoming environment. But when it comes to food, as a dietitian, obviously I'm a little biased, but I think it makes sense as a sport that food or fueling for yourself for your sport would maybe come up in your dance classroom, if you will. I think best case scenario would be like, especially for older kids and or teachers of dance, to have some sort of like educational opportunity, whether it be a workshop or a one-on-one, to have and make sure you have the correct information around specific foods itself. Like you'd mentioned, like people mentioning, oh, you should have more of X, Y, or Z food group. For looking for specific information around fueling for sport, I definitely think it would be super helpful to have some sort of interaction with the professional, which would be myself or a different type of RDN. Just like if I had questions about dance or anything of the like, I certainly would not be going to my, dietitian colleague, because they would have no idea of what is like appropriate or proper. I think in addition to that, to speaking about food at all, when it makes sense, I think the best thing that comes to mind is to just keep it neutral. If you don't have formal training, speak about food in a neutral way and just being super aware of the way that your own bias as a human that eats food might come into the conversation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, the comments piece, it comes up a lot in dance. And I love how you mentioned fueling your body, because sometimes people will use that, like the fueling your body type of phrase, to feel like it's a teachable moment. Like, okay, we're at competition and the dancer has decided to have some candy or something, or, before they go on stage, and somebody might say to them, that really a good choice to be making right now? And to me, that does bother me, because I kind of feel like, who are we to say what is a good choice and what is a bad choice? But I feel like right away we're like setting a tone, or, placing an ideal on it as if there was like a better food type of thing. And now, obviously, what's going to sustain your energy longer? Is it going to be the candy, or is it going to be something different? But like for a long competition day. But I love how you said to bring in a professional, because I think that's where a lot of us do forget that, like, though we may know what works for us in our, food life journey or things like that, or we know what agrees with us or doesn't agree, or what may fuel us for a longer day or things like that. It's not our place to, step in and say these things. It's more important to get a professional in the industry to educate the class on this.
Yeah, I love too that you kind of bring up that it comes from your own sense of your own food journey, or food relationship is often a phrase that we would use. And I think that is a huge part of why I mentioned, just especially as like a dance teacher or someone who's sort of the, grown up in the room, that's definitely heavily influencing, mostly positively, all of your students. The way that you come forth with your own food relationship as developing a bias toward food, or the comments you're making around food, people, especially kids, are going to hold on to that. It's going to influence them. So I think sometimes it really is more about like working it right within yourself first, understanding your own food relationship, even if it's just like at a basic level first, so then you can understand how to bring a professional in a way that you can influence yourself and as the teacher, and then influence the kiddos or the younger people that you're teaching.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like it can even start too with our youngest dancers, which I'm going to talk to you more about towards the end. But, when we are, so say that we have gone this route and we have brought in a professional to kind of speak with us all about fueling our bodies, how do you suggest, because I'm speaking, I guess, more on like a competition, or say like a long dance day. So like maybe a long dance day, a dancer may have like 4 hours of dance or something like that. And so, we are always preparing the dancers mentally and physically for these big days and big events, but like, how can we prepare them nutritionally while being mindful? Like, does it matter what types of foods? Like, what are typically your recommendations for, fueling the body in that sense?
Absolutely. So I think it definitely can have a lot to do with types of foods, or really like food groups or food categories, and understanding, especially again, like as an athlete, as part of a sport in which you're performing and you're moving your body, it is about energy, understanding sustainable energy. So when I'm meeting with people one-on-one that are athletes, including dancers, we talk a lot about the different food groups. The first one that comes to mind, especially when I consider like competition or a long dance day, are carbohydrates, because that's where your primary energy source is coming from, are carbohydrates. So that could be pastas, breads. Sometimes it is coming from candies or fruit. There's so many different types of carbohydrates, but there is a way for us to talk about carbohydrates as far as fueling for energy throughout the day. That is sometimes dependent on the kind of food. How much energy would this carbohydrate give you? How much energy would this one give you? I think as a dance teacher too, it sounds like part of how you may or may not be able to help your students prepare is understanding that they need to consider the energy they're using all day, whether it come from carbs, making sure they pair it with protein, keep your muscles strong and moving, but also making time to eat. So I think of like having the ability, or trying to find or make the ability for your students to fuel frequently through that long day. And to understand that, like, if you're dancing 4+ hours or moving your body for a long period of time, you're gonna run out of steam at some point if you don't refuel in the middle.
Yeah, that is such a good point because, from experience, I feel like it's like we almost forget that eating during all this energy, like using activity, that we do need to like eat, because a lot of, like, if it was a dance night, for example, a lot of these dancers, they are at school, they go to dance, they're like dancing all the way through dinner, and then it's like nighttime by the time they leave. And I think it's so important too, as like dance teachers, and dance studio owners, when schedules are being put together, like noticing, do dancers have a break at any point during this night? Can they get in 15 minutes to make sure that they're refueling, or continuing to fuel, because that is a long time to go. And I feel like, back in the day or here and there, it's like, okay, well, just bring a protein bar and get a bite in when you can. And it's like, that just doesn't, now looking back, that does not really seem like the healthiest option. I mean, at least it was something, but I don't know if it's enough to sustain all the activity that we're doing.
Yeah, so I think so often when I'm sitting with people one-on-one specifically, I will literally have dancers, because I know that competition days in particular are really long and taxing, with so many different like pieces moving. I always ask them, tell me your schedule. Let's actually look at your schedule and when do you have breaks to really utilize those breaks. So I think that's a huge, huge help, and to really then utilize those breaks. And when you mentioned kids, like sometimes they're in school all day, followed by a night at dance, and then they go home and it's late, but maybe they have homework and they don't go, there's the hope is that they're fueling all day long. But I always would think of pre-fueling and post-fueling. So like making sure that alongside some breaks during a long dance day and fueling throughout, making sure that your dancers know it's super important to fuel adequately before you have any of your dance, whether it be just class on a normal weekday or a competition day, and also fueling after. So even if it's a super late night and you go home and you have a little bit of homework and it's late and you want to go to bed, it's super important to also talk about making sure that they refuel to rejuvenate after they've exercised and moved their bodies so much.
Yeah, I definitely think it's something that we as dance teachers, I don't know, need to be more aware of as like a part of this, because I think being, it comes back to too also, like you said, bringing in a professional in the industry to talk about this, because I don't think that, it's like until I learned more about food because of like the disordered eating patterns that I had grown up and experienced, I really didn't, I didn't look at food as a way to help me. And like sadly, at times I would look at food as a way to hurt me. Like that type of food is bad for me, or like I need to have like this instead, or not eat that meal and things like that. Like there was a lot of things in growing up that I, as personal experience had with, but just thinking on that, if that was me, there are probably so many other dancers that go through that too. And it's just that, just knowing that food it's not there to be harmful, it's fueling you, it's like literally what you need to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just because I absolutely, even as not a dancer, would consider dance just as equal and important as a sport as anything else: soccer, football, marathon running, you name it. And I don't think that people would necessarily think twice about talking about fueling for those sports. And for some reason, I think sometimes it's like goes by the wayside that dance is absolutely a sport, whether you're competing or not competing. Your body is doing amazing things and needs to be fueled appropriately in order for it to be safe, for it to be healthy, and also for it to be effective, just like any other sport. So it totally makes sense that I love how you mentioned like it would be ideal for everyone to kind of talk about food and fueling as like this positive light, this thing that you could be adding to your performance, adding to your body, adding to your well-being. And you're right, so often it's not spoken about in that way.
Yeah, and like going on that about the things that we speak about, and this might actually to start to lend itself into more of like body awareness, body image, that sort of topic. But what do you feel are things that we should definitely not be saying or expressing within our classrooms? Like, are there any statements or things that you feel it's just not an important place to be saying in the dance classroom?
I'm sure that I have a couple. Honestly, when I consider this, the first things that comes to mind around like, oh, I wish people wouldn't say this or wouldn't do this, like truly comes to mind as far as like body image, but truly that comes from a place of the things I've heard my clients speak about, my dancer clients speak about their own experiences in dance classrooms, has been a lot of body comments. Now, that being said, and I'm sure you can agree and speak to this, Amanda, is like my understanding of dance is that it's all about moving your body. And oftentimes there are a lot of techniques that are specific to what your body looks like as far as like lines and movements. So it's not to say that you can't speak about bodies, because I think you need to. My thought on that is really to be aware of how neutral we're approaching speaking about bodies. So what I wouldn't do is I certainly wouldn't encourage any kind of discussion or encouragement around body change, meaning changing the size, shape, or weight of your body, whether it be bigger or smaller, it can be detrimental. I think that we can agree doesn't need to be related to the ways that maybe you might speak to someone's lines, or the, straightness of their leg or their toe point. Like those things can be neutralized when we describe them or when you talk about them, so that there's no judgment or morality attached. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that really does. And actually, with you saying that, I this made me think about some phrases that have come up in not my life, but in other students' lives that have like brought to my attention this. And like one of it is being one time a dancer, grew like taller, like grew a couple inches or something. And the comments were like, wow, like look at how you've lengthened out. And that became a huge issue for that dancer because it was like, okay, now you're equating this like positiveness to the fact that I've like grown taller or quote lengthened out. And it really kind of played with the headspace. And other comments, you're totally right about the technique portion too, is that when we're giving cues, we are using body parts at times, like giving different anatomical cues and things like that with our dancing. But, I personally, there are things I will never say and like have never said, but have heard before. And some of those things might be like stuck in your stomach or anything with the word like gut, like pull up your gut. Like, I know this sounds absolutely horrible, like with me saying these things, but like the truth is that these are things that have been said. And like, I have like heard these things or have heard others hear these things. And it's so sad because there are other ways we can describe that. So like if you are trying to say stuck in your stomach, okay, like let's take that completely out of the vocabulary and maybe talk about like if we're needing them to activate in their core more as a safety measure, well, let's talk about forming some core cues that can help, guide that way versus taking it's such a harsh and like I don't know, kind of rude, like a rude light, honestly. So when you were speaking on that, I just wanted to share phrases and comments that I've heard people say and, just going off of what you said.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you are saying is what we're noticing about the difference of like suck in your gut versus activate your core, or using a different, very neutral, more observation-based cue, is the judgment or the perception of judgment behind that. So like even like you said, if you're saying a phrase like suck in your gut, whether it's intended or not, it sounds judgmental versus speaking about the same exact notion of activating your core from a place that's really neutral, that doesn't feel as though it's targeting anything or anyone. Yeah, I completely agree.
I do feel, as dance educators, that being aware of how we speak on things is so important. I know we've talked about the influence that we have, and also just, we were just speaking on how we correct things. But, you've mentioned many times that you do work with dancers in your field. And so, in your work, what have been some of the biggest like themes or things that you come across when it comes to dancers and nutrition or dancers with eating disorders?
It's such a good question. And I think I kind of have immediate thoughts related to both. So I think when it comes to dancers and nutrition, the biggest theme that I see is honestly not even always specific to dancers or athletes in general. It could be even more broad, is this idea of health related to food. What is healthy? What is unhealthy? And so oftentimes as we dig into that, what we discover is that food has been judged or moralized or put in those categories for so long. And as an athlete specifically, dancers are often worried, am I doing the right thing? Am I eating the right foods? Am I choosing things that are healthy for me? Even more so, and kind of more related to a body image sense of things, we often end up finding out that people's version of health and food is very much related to their body size, specifically with dance. I don't think I've ever worked with a dancer where body image has not been a conversation, but oftentimes there's this connection between the idea of health and being smaller, being a smaller person, whatever that might mean for them, whatever experience they've had with that in the dance community. And sometimes that's related to the idea of performance. Sometimes that's related to the idea of worth. That's sometimes related to the idea of being noticed or being better than. There's so many different avenues I've seen it take, but when it comes to food or nutrition, that's definitely what I've seen dancers come to me the most with, is this theme of what their idea of health is related to food, and then watching that branch out into so many different body image related pieces of their life.
Yeah, and that is, I always think of that statement, like trying to be smaller, like always trying to make yourself smaller. I always find that to be like one of the saddest statements because, like you said, even outside of the dance world, I feel like that's something that like a lot of people, with difficulties going through this, subject matter that we're talking with, that's like always a theme is wanting to be smaller. And it's like so sad that we want to take ourselves and, dim ourselves down in a way.
Yeah, and even especially as like I've been like a lifelong audience member, as someone who loves and enjoys so much watching dancers. I like when dancers don't make themselves smaller. Like watching someone take up space in so many different ways. Like truly, as an audience member, I can't imagine why, with compassion, but I can't imagine why that would want to be part of their narrative, and yet very much understand where it might come from and having heard about it so often.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so right. And it's funny because I mean, in my contemporary classes, a big thing that we talk about is how do we fill the space more? How can we be more present in every inch of the room or every inch of our own like kinesphere, like the space that is around ourselves? And like, how do we fill that? How are we using that? And, we talk about too how the stage can be so big and you don't want to just be like taken away by the stage. You want to really be present on that stage. And so I'm sure as an audience member, like you're receiving that end of it. Like when somebody really finds their self, like and their space and their light, like it's such a beautiful thing when that happens.
Yeah. Oh, and I love listening to you talk about it like that, because what it would be like if we could take that notion and just like spew it all over everyone, even outside of the dance world. Like that's such a lovely way to think about the way that people take up space in the world. But I really love
Yes.
the way that you talk about it.
Yeah, I love that too. That's definitely, yeah. That would be a way beautiful thing if that was how it went.
Related to dance, like in the eating disorder world, as far as seeing dancers that may actually struggle with eating disorders or really disordered eating, I also just wanted to speak to a really interesting theme that I wonder if you have thoughts on, that I've seen over and over, is that we talk about eating disorders or disordered eating really like serving some sort of purpose outside of the food itself, right? And I think the thing that I've had most of my dancer clients speak to me about is this idea of control, being in control. So oftentimes that might mean like using disordered eating behaviors as a means to feel, whether it's fake or not, a sense of control. And it makes me think, and I'm curious, what, as a dance teacher, like where might this come from when it comes to the way that dance or dancers are spoken to in the classroom? Like when I think of control, like yes, as a dancer, I'm assuming you need to have some sense of quote unquote control, as far as like control of your body, control of the space. It just is like such an interesting connection that I feel like I've heard from every dancer I've worked with before when it comes to really struggling with disordered behaviors.
Yeah, I am like, wow, like the fact that you brought that up, I control is something like it definitely makes sense how it comes up because I think that, we also look at like many different forms of dance. Like there are so many different styles of dance, but so much of these styles we tend to call a discipline. And when I think of the word discipline, discipline to me also like equates to control. It's kind of like this I don't want to say rigid, but it's structured way about that we go things. Things need to look a certain way, be a certain way, correctly aligned a certain way. Some of that comes down to safety, safe practice, making sure, that the joints are aligning in specific ways or that we're using the specific muscles to do certain actions. But when it comes to control, I think that, especially in the dance setting, if we are really hard on ourselves, like, I'm going to take the personality type of like a perfectionist because I think that dancers also get thrown this like perfectionist like type of personality a lot of the time because of the way that we are brought up in the disciplined structure of dance. And I guess I'm trying to like explain this in a way, but like if we take ballet, like ballet has a specific structure. You begin at the bar, you do plies followed by tendus, like everything always matches this particular structure and order. And if a dancer feels maybe like they're out of control in that element, in the sense of like, wow, I'm not like progressing to where I want to go or whatnot, they already have this idea of like what perfection looks like to them, in the sense of like aligning, or I know you mentioned before like lines and pictures and shapes. Maybe they take that control into other areas of their life too, and it becomes this control over all things. I don't know, maybe that's just how I would correlate what you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, again, as someone who isn't a dancer, it makes complete sense to me that the theme that I so often see has to do with this. I guess the word I chose was control, but when it comes to perfectionism, in some way. And I think whether you're a dancer or not, this idea that something needs to be done a certain way or is rigid, or you are only, better than or good if you perform in this way, and therefore if you don't, you are bad or not seen as good. It makes a lot of sense that it would infiltrate into this type of discipline, like you say. Like it is structured. It needs to be. It sounds like it needs to be. But I think for those that really struggle, it can be like this misconstrued facade of what control is in their life if they are feeling out of control in some way, shape, or form, whether it be related to their dance world or not. I think it's somehow connected.
Yeah, I can understand that. Definitely, like finding any sense of control, in their life, in their livelihood and stuff. And for me with dance, I know with control, like in my contemporary class, I know that they've spent technical classes really pulled up, and they're doing all these different like postural lines and shapes and things like that. And so when it comes time for contemporary, I really try to encourage them to let go of control. And that is something that is so difficult because one, we're always really afraid, where it becomes like a fear thing. I don't want to lose control because what's going to happen? I'm going to fall. Okay, well, what if you fall? And like talking about how everything that we've done within our disciplined structure has created our bodies to be able to now go in and out of control when we can. And so some dance disciplines do kind of like go with that, go with, can we find ourselves out of control and then, and find our way back to control, things like that, just to allow them to find a safer release within the work that they do. And an encouraging space, I think, is also like really key on this, like making sure that the room and the environment that we're setting up is, really a judgment-free zone, that we are very encouraging and warm with how we're, presenting different topics of information and things like that. I think that can go a long way. But I think also allowing the dancers to have times where they don't have this like control or like needs to look this way type of feeling. I think that's really important.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. And when you were talking about that like fear aspect of like, what if I fall? My mind immediately went to like, oh, how interesting, because fear of anything is sort of the unknown, right? What if, what if? And I think what you were then speaking to around the type of classroom that you would prefer to see and prefer to lead, as far as like comforting, kind, like think about how that would build confidence and trust. Like the word trust came to mind, of like trust in you and what you're saying and guiding them in, but also trust in themselves. Like what a beautiful thing that would like be so idealistic.
Yes. And one of my next questions for you actually kind of like goes off of what we were just talking about, but what are ways we can help dancers to feel safer in our space around this topic? I know I mentioned a few that I do, but do you have any recommendations that may help us to create a safer space with, whether it is dancers that have body image difficulty or dancers that have eating disorders and things like that?
Well, it's so interesting because you ask about a safer space, and like, well, you definitely would know how to make it like physically safer. But when I think of how to make it more like emotionally safe, as far as having and trusting your dance teacher or even your peers, the people around you, and really not having that fear or total lack of confidence, would be I would say acceptance is the word that comes to mind, like knowing that whatever way you choose to show up is accepted, whether it be all bodies being accepted, all abilities being accepted, all levels being acceptable. Because so much of the time, feeling sort of unsafe emotionally or mentally in a space is related to not feeling worthy enough to be part of that space. So I think creating a safe environment in your classroom is going to be all about having what feels like or what comes off to be a very accepting space of everyone there, of everyone and anyone there.
Oh, I love that. That's such a good word and a thing that we should really be so aware of and to say, like maybe even in the beginning of the season and starting it off, like laying the ground rules, if you will, for the class ahead, but like, creating that accepting space. And I loved everything that you said about that, the way that you spoke on it. It was just so beautiful. It made so much sense just now. So thank you for saying all that.
Absolutely.
So this next question was actually one that came in through our DMs when I was mentioning that we were going to have this episode. And so, as teachers, how do we support dancers with body image when it comes to mirrors in the studio and dress codes? So I know that you see dance most of the time in like the performance end of things, but for, when we walk into the dance studio, typical dance studio structure has a mirror on either one or multiple walls. And there's like bars along the side of the walls and then the big open dance space. But these mirrors are huge, like big, tall mirrors. And they are spending hour to hour and a half classes times however many classes they have in a day looking in the mirror. And so for those dancers that do have, or just in general, like how to support any dancer with body image, whether they have a positive body image or maybe not so much of a positive body image, in their headspace. So with mirrors and dress codes.
So it's so interesting because as someone who isn't a dancer, I've heard about these mirrors and these dress codes from all of my dancer clients before as something that does get really difficult. And I think the mirrors, first and foremost, like you had mentioned, makes sense because if someone is struggling with body image and they are then seeing their reflection and the reflection of others around them, that's going to be a really tough space sometimes, especially if they are not in a good space in their head. So I think kind of things that we've mentioned previous to this question, what it makes me think of is really trying to curate your classroom to be a very accepting space of people who are feeling any which way about their body or live in any which body, right? Like, I think that then brings me to this idea of comparison. I've heard this a lot from my dancer clients as well, is that it's really difficult not to compare yourself to your peers around you when it comes to body image because there's so much reflection. So I think, and you tell me about like the reality of this, Amanda, but when you speak really neutrally or from like an observational place around someone's body, like we were speaking earlier, like speaking about like activating their core or the lines of their legs or what have you, I would imagine that it would be great if we didn't speak in ways that compared one student to another. I don't know the reality of that, but I think that would be really great to stay away from in the sense of continuing to be accepting of all bodies, whatever their ability, whatever they look like.
Yes, I'm so glad that you brought this up because it's something that I often have a really difficult time with in the sense of, so like in this class setting, say we do a combination at the end, and then it's about like maybe at the end, some teachers may pull out the ones who they feel did the combination the best, and then have them do this group. And I have a really hard time with this because I maybe did it like once or twice in my teaching career because the dancers were always like, well, who was the best? Like, who did it the better? Like, who was it? And it creates like this competitive environment that I really did not ever like. And so then it was like you were just talking about, like comparing like what they're seeing in others. And even if it was completely just related on like the way they were doing their dance technique, I also realized it comes down to like maybe how those dancers were looking while they were doing it too, like in the eyes of others that are watching. And so I totally stopped doing this in my classes. And instead, what I would do is for the combination, I would have the dancers do it in groups. And then sometimes we'll stop and say like, okay, who moved you in that group and why do they move you? And so we make it more of an emotional attachment. Like, I loved watching Kelsey because she looked like she was having so much fun. She had so much energy and it just really brought a smile to my face. So we stopped, talking about like how incredible so and so's backflip was or like whatever it was. And we talked about like how are they moving you from an emotional standpoint. So I think when we took like the physical aspect of it, like I noticed a shift in the environment or like feeling of the environment of my classroom. So I mean that's just personal like experience that I could speak on the question that you asked.
Yeah, I love that. Like well, of course, as someone who doesn't dance, I was trying to imagine like, it is important how their bodies are moving. And I understand that. So is there a way that you can neutralize that idea or like call attention to something different? Especially not us to compare body to body. And that is an amazing question. Who moved you? I love that so much. That sounds like a really interesting way to take physical out of it altogether and really get people more in their like emotional mind. Very cool.
Yeah, I also think like I think it's more of like my teaching philosophy, but like, I always say as dancers, we have the ability to move the audience. And when people come to a show, they want to feel something, they want to see something, they want to, be involved with the story that you're telling. And so for me, like that's just a huge part of mine. But it would be nice if if we could look at dance for the emotional aspect of what it provides, not just on the physical aesthetic, that it obviously brings this, beautiful performance to, but there's so many other sides to it as well.
Yeah, it very much makes sense.
Okay. And I just wanted to speak briefly on this too, on this question. But for me, other ways that I personally support dancers that have body image when it comes to the mirrors is sometimes I do exercises that do not face the mirror. So sometimes I will like shift the dancers away from the mirror or like, face different directions in the room. If your room has the ability to like pull a curtain across the front, like sometimes I do that. And the dress code's hard. So I was like going to speak on this, but a lot of the time for dancers, your dress code is a leotard and tights. And for those that have body image difficulty, that can be really hard because you're basically like in this tight form fitting dress code for hours at a time. And so, me personally, as a teacher, like if someone is struggling, I allow them to wear things over their leotard and their tights as long as it's not like unsafe. Like if they're wearing like big baggy sweatpants that they're tripping over or like long sleeves that they're like slipping on when we're doing plank work or things like that. I personally allow them to, if they feel, because it's more important for me that they feel comfortable to move in the space, because if they don't feel comfortable, they're never going to meet the progress that they're so wanting in their dancing, because they're going to be holding back from how they're feeling about themselves in that moment.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the dress code because I have had this come up of it like with my clients as well as a huge piece that has been difficult, mostly because it sounds like a lot of traditional dance or dance forms will have really tight fitting clothing, and it also sounds like from the perspective of some clients I've had that is because it is easier for their bodies to be judged, and whether that's a perception that is accurate or not, the perception that is there enough um, definitely makes sense that it would make them uncomfortable, especially if they're not in a good headspace with their bodies. So I've had some clients speak with teachers and ask permission from people like yourself, Amanda, to wear something a little different, within the guidelines of safety. That totally makes sense.
Yeah, and I think I love that you mentioned, I mean, it's so sad, but I love that you mentioned the perception of why we wear form-fitting clothing. And so with dancers, if they're in the mindset of so that their bodies are being judged, a lot of the time it's so that we can see are they safely working within the correct alignment of things. And so for us, that might be an important discussion to have too, like because it sounds like maybe there's a disconnect, like I need to wear form fitting clothes so that my body can be judged and I can be told how to do things differently. But instead of using those words, maybe saying, it's so that we can safely see that you are working within the correct areas for, such and such a movement or whatnot.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense because honestly, I would have assumed that it might have something to do with judging their bodies and what their bodies looked like as far as a teaching perspective. So that might be a really great conversation for dance teachers to have with their students.
Yes, absolutely. I know I have just a few more questions left, and this one was important because I think this is important too for our younger dancers because, we've been talking about the things that you don't want to say within the classroom setting or, ways to encourage. But you are a mother, and as a teacher, we many times take on the role of comforting our students just as a parent would. And so, learning from this mindset, because I do feel it's important knowing that it's coming from this mindset. What are things that you do or don't say, or, do say around your own children when it comes to any of these topics?
Oh, this is such a great question. And it could, of course, go for like dance or any other space where there are children of any age. My children happen to be little, so it's fun to actually start experimenting with like, how do I want to show up and talk about food and or bodies with them? My daughter will be 3 and my son will be 1. So we're kind of right at the beginning, but I would say, first and foremost, when it comes to food, at least in my home, there is no such thing as food, what I'd call like food morality. Like there's no good or bad categories of food, or there's no right way to eat. So it kind of takes away this hierarchy of like good, better, best. And I think because of that, it allows everybody to have and meet their needs differently. Just like my 1-year-old is going to have different needs than my 3-year-old, et cetera. So really, if ever speaking about food in the classroom setting or with little kids or with children that are older of any age, I would also say the same for adults, actually, to really come and speak about foods from a neutral standpoint. Like really, and again, checking your own beliefs around that, but speaking about food as food, like this just is what it is. This is maybe what it does for you, but it doesn't make it good or bad. That's definitely the mindset that we have around food and for children in my home.
Yeah, I love that. I know that I've asked you for help on that too, because I want to make sure that for my daughter, I'm also, more aware. And I know there have been times like she loves all things sweet. And it was like she could eat, she always wants to have like candy or an ice cream or things like that. And it's like, I don't ever want to be in the place where that becomes a thing that, oh no, you can't have that because that's not that good for you. Let's try to have something else. So the way you talk about food morality, I think is so important, because we want to set them up for, to thrive and to do well and to feel good about who they are and the choices that they're getting to make for themselves.
Yeah, and like truly we have younger children, but like truly could go for any age. I was most of the kiddos and or like older teens that I've worked with that are dancers, for example, are not as young as our children. So it's
Yeah.
the same applies. The same applies. I would say like really speaking and helping people understand food or the way that they treat their body with food from a very like neutral standpoint is key. And I would say, as far as bodies, I think obviously as dancers, but like children in general, it is such a massive time of body change, what I'd call embodiment, just like anyone's relation to their body and how they're going to develop feelings about that. Really, my best encouragement is to talk about bodies in this light of they're just so cool. They're amazing, that all bodies, no matter weight, shape, size, color, ability, etc., are really amazing things. And I'm sure in so many ways that relates to the dance world. They all can do different things. They all have different abilities. They all change over time. So they're all sort of on this equal playing field, but that bodies in general are just this really cool thing.
Yes, I love that. And I think kids would have such a good, like a fun time with that too, going through like, the body is an amazing thing. Like, let's talk about all the things it can do. And it's like a celebration of who we are and what we have. It's just, like you said, it's such a cool thing.
Yeah, I think too the last thing that comes up as far as something that I'm sure, and you tell me can like relate to the dance world as far as things that I like would or wouldn't say around children, is kind of maybe even less about what you say, but really making safe space for like any and all emotions to be valid. And I'm again like, as I've heard you speak about dance and the way that you do, it obviously there are emotions in that room. And so I think part of creating that environment of like, what do I say, what don't I say, is when the word acceptance, right? Like accepting emotions so that people feel more comfortable and trusting their own emotions.
Yes. Oh, so, so good. I have loved everything that you've said today. I think it is just such important information for all of us to have to only better our classrooms further. And I wanted to end just on some like little fun rapid fire questions, just to kind of like end on a fun note here. So here we go. If you could give dancers or humans any piece of advice around body awareness, what would it be?
Oh man. I think it would go to bodies are cool. Like I just and maybe this is like the nerd in me, like bodies are just freaking amazing.
Yes, and I think going with that also, you said acceptance a lot. I think those were two huge advice points that you gave in today's episode. So yes, I love that. Number two, if you could eat one food for all three meals in a given day, what would it be?
At the current moment, it would be Trader Joe's dark chocolate peanut butter cups.
Ooh, yum. I love that. All right. And this is just important for us dance teachers, but do you have any favorite accounts on Instagram that we as dance teachers could follow as recommended resources?
I think that I definitely like the first thing that come to mind are some of the few accounts that are actually like dancers that put their content out there. But the thing that I find that is so different about them is making sure that you have dancers that are very diverse. And I mean diverse in content, diverse in body weight, shape, size, or awareness. I don't necessarily have specifics that I have offhand, but I would say, especially as dance teachers, if you have specific um, content out there that you think would be really helpful for your students, be very aware of the diversity of that content. I think that would be my biggest recommendation.
Yes. Actually, I want to speak on this like really quick because this is something I've noticed in the dance teacher threads on our Facebook groups and things like that, because there are a few different dance teacher Facebook groups. But something that I think is really important too is like you mentioned like the diversity of, shapes, sizes, all of that. And that is something that in the costuming world is really not prevalent. Like when you open a dance costume catalog, there is not a lot of difference between the models that you're seeing. And so me personally, I feel like that's something that should change. But I just wanted to say that too, because you were just speaking on that. And so I think costume companies, we need to think about diversifying the models that we choose as well.
That definitely makes, I would have never thought of that, but it totally makes sense.
Yeah, and it's not so often like the dancers will see that because a lot of the time it's just like the teachers that are like finding costumes for their pieces. But I mean, if they go on any dancewear website, that's what they're seeing. I know like Aerie is one of those companies like American Eagle Aerie that they really try to use a wide, diverse range of humans as models. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I just hope that maybe the dance world could also shift that way too. All right. And I love this conversation with you so much, as I'm sure everybody else will too. So, where can we find you and more information on your work? So, Instagram, website, any of that.
Sure. I would say I'm probably most active on Instagram at Kelsey Rigopoulos, RDN. And it's actually the same for my website. So Kelsey Rigopoulos, RDN.com.
All right, awesome. And I will make sure to put that in the show notes so that people know where to find you. And before we leave, Kelsey, I just want to say thank you so, so much. I absolutely love the way that you spoke on all of today's items, the way you described and discussed things. And I know that the audience is going to love it so much too. And I appreciate you being here so much. So thank you again for doing this interview with me.
Absolutely, Amanda. Thank you so much. It was totally my pleasure.
Oh my gosh, that was just such an amazing conversation. As it was going, I just couldn't believe all of the stuff that we talked about in this episode. I felt like we touched upon so many different things. And I hope that you were able to get a lot out of this and also a fresh look at how we view body image and nutrition as dance teachers and how we can better educate ourselves and our dancers and our dance families. I want to thank Kelsey one more time for being here today with Dance Teacher Pep Talk because I think that this is the start of a really important conversation for so many in our field. And I hope to have Kelsey back again on the podcast. If you'd like to follow Kelsey, make sure that you follow her on Instagram at Kelsey Rigopoulos RDN. Her website is the same, kelseyrigopoulos.rdn.com. I will leave that information in the show notes. But thank you all so much for listening to today's episode and have a great rest of your day.